Welcome to ADAC Answers Live, collaborative conversations for school leaders. I'm your host, Matthew Maloney, a teacher and school leader for more than 15 years, and now the Vice President of Marketing here at ADAC. Artificial intelligence, AI, is rapidly transforming our world. In education, AI tools are emerging as powerful resources, offering personalized learning experiences, automating administrative tasks, and even providing innovative teaching aids. However, this potential comes with the crucial need for responsible implementation. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll offer solutions and answer questions with our experts, Chiara and Michael Broach. And as Michael and Adam and I were discussing right before getting on the call, none of us can really be experts in AI because it's so new and it's changing by the minute. So, but just to introduce our guest, Adam is an applied associate professor in the School of Communications at the University of Hartford. He teaches courses on social media, public relations, and digital media. He earned his bachelor's degree from Central Connecticut State and his master's degree from Quinnipiac University. The current vice principal of Bishop Kenney High School in Jacksonville, Florida, is Michael Broach. He served Bishop Kenney in various roles since 2004, including a teacher, department chair, academic dean. He holds his bachelor's degree from the University of North Florida and his master's degree from St. Leo University. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you so much for being with us and lending your experience and expertise.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Just a couple of housekeeping. Please use the chat. If you have questions that arise during the conversation, please put it right in the chat there. We'll try and get to it right away, or there's going to be dedicated time at the end for Q&A as well. But please, we want you to be part of the conversation. Add comments and questions to the chat as we go. And as I said at the beginning, we are recording this so that it will be available, and we will make sure we email that recording to you all after the session. So let's get started. And Adam, let's start with you and thinking about AI policy development and the importance of developing one, especially at a school-wide level versus leaving it up to whether that be departments or individual teachers to kind of have their own policy. Why having a unified building-wide policy is so important.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. And I'm currently teaching, so I'm going through this. I'm going to give actually an example that's happening right now to me to illustrate this point. But if we think about it, I'm sure many ways that we can talk about how it's helpful, but I'm going to just focus on two right now. One being messaging, right? What you're trying to message as a school, and then the other one being enforcement. And when I say messaging, I'm going to give you an example in a minute that's going to show this. But if you're talking about how you are, we push critical thinking. We want students to create on their own. We want students to have a balanced approach. That's one thing. Then there's another side of it. We want students to be the most innovative that they are. We want them to push the boundaries. Okay, either one of those approaches, all right, you understand that as a school, that's the approach that you're taking. But then you have to think, are your policies lining up with that? And so my example for that is there's a colleague of mine. We both do a similar class. We do a similar project, and we both use AI in this class. But here's the difference. So how he has his students do it for this project is he has AI pretty much create the project first. It's without going into it, it's a campaign. It's like a marketing campaign. Has it created, with a bunch of prompts, this full plan, and then the students are supposed to go in and edit and tailor it based on that foundation that the AI has created. I take a complete opposite approach. I take the approach, you need to create the plan first, then you put portions into AI to have it tweak certain areas, make certain language stronger, come up with new recommendations. So on my version, it's 95% the student is on their own with AI with that little assistant. With his, it's 95% is the AI. Well, maybe he wouldn't argue 95%. I think a lot of students, a big bulk is AI and the students doing it. Now, that goes along with the messaging. If you're listening there and you're cringing because you go, oh my gosh, you would let AI do 90% of the work. Well, if that's your mission was to be critical thinking focused, yeah, I cringe too. That's why I don't have my students do it. On the other hand, if you're someone that says, the school says, we want to push innovation, we want students to experiment like that, well, then maybe it makes sense. But if we don't have a direct policy, if you don't have a clear policy on, what is it that the instructors are allowed to do with their students, you could see in either one of those situations, it fits, right? And then lastly, with that comes the enforcement. If a student does that with me and turns in 90% of it, and I see it was AI, and I say no, and I try to discipline the student, and the student goes to administration. Administration didn't have a clear policy, and the student says, well, in that other class, I was allowed to do that. Now, all of a sudden, the administration's having a hard time trying to figure out, what was acceptable or not if there was no policy in place. One faculty member is doing it one way, one faculty member is doing it the other way. So it's just, one example here, but I think you can see it just creates confusion. Then it creates problems down the line if it comes down to enforcement. When a lot of that could have been solved if there were some clear guidelines, and then the faculty, member knew where their margins were, where the guidelines were to be able to do what.
Thank you, Adam. Yeah, I think that's so important. You use the word guidelines, guiding principles, and I think what makes AI so unique, especially when we're talking about policy development, is that it's not your typical policy that you'd find in your student handbook and whatnot. And several of our registrants, Stephanie Bark, the assistant principal at St. Lorenz School in Michigan, as well as David Barber, the director of network operations at Silverdale Baptist in Chattanooga, Tennessee, both asked about an AI policy template. So, Michael, can you talk a little bit about how maybe a pre-made template might not be the best given the dynamics of AI and how it's not your typical policy?
Yeah. And actually, I'd like to touch on something Adam just said that I think fits this question. He mentioned about what is your messaging? And I think that's the conversation you have to have in your school about, what is your school's philosophy and what is your school's messaging? So here in my school, in our school handbook, we really have kept the wording basic for the handbook. We state that students should not use AI for their work unless directed by the teacher. And we still expect students to provide proper credit or citation for any information gained from any source, whether that be a research source or AI. So we still hold to academic integrity. But what happens beyond the handbook, I think, is more important. The real application of our school's policy is in the guidelines that we establish in the classrooms. So, for example, following the release of ChatGPT, what was that, fall of 22, we formed an AI task force, and we had teachers who volunteered to be on the committee, our academic deans, our disciplinary deans, our technology specialists, and me. And so together as a task force, we first tried to tackle, okay, what do we put in the handbook? And we realized it's hard to put some definitive policy. For example, when other things in this life of the school come up, you can come up with a real specific verbiage, and maybe you find other schools that have something real specific to put in the handbook. But because AI is constantly evolving, we found that we had to be more basic in the handbook. And then we shifted our focus, not just school policies, but how are we educating students? How are we educating parents? How are we educating our teachers? And I know we'll touch on PD a little bit later in this conversation. So our philosophy here is that we can't just ban AI. And I know some school handbooks just say AI is not allowed at all. Well, there's some good uses of AI. There's some not so good uses of AI. I think the key for us as school leaders is to define, what are those ethical boundaries? So this year, what we've done is we've really shifted our focus to working with our department chairs and our academic deans. In fact, they came up with our own school set of guidelines of do's and don'ts. And that document continues to evolve this year, but basically it's an example of here's what's acceptable, here's an example of not acceptable. And then we're using that to teach the students. And so it has to be really with every assignment, the teachers need to be having an ongoing conversation about where the ethical line is, what's acceptable, what's not, those intentional conversations with the kids. So I think when it comes to the handbook, my personal opinion on this is don't get bogged down into writing policies that are way too specific or complicated, because you're going to find that you just have to keep changing them. Instead, keep the handbook basic to your school's core expectations for academic integrity and student learning, and really shift the focus to those ongoing conversations with faculty and with students, and especially here in the K-12 setting with families.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Michael. Yeah, I think when we think about AI policy, we really want to think about what's our philosophy, vision, approach, and how does it fit with our school mission and our learning goals. We're gonna break up our next few sessions in talking about professional learning, how we teach our students about AI, and then that ever important enforcement question, because I think that comes up a lot, especially among school leaders. But let's be honest, our students are probably galaxies ahead of us and our teachers in how to use AI and how to optimize it. And so, Adam, with that, can you give us some thoughts on how to approach professional learning and professional development for teachers on AI, given that our students probably already know a ton about it?
Yeah, I think the main piece of advice I would give is to actually use it yourself, not for everything, but to try it out, spend that dedicated time to try it, write different prompts, right? What you put it in, see what the output is, see how the AI, based on your prompts, what it can do. Just by doing it and playing with it in that way, you start to understand it a little bit more, and it works for, I know this question is going to come up in a little bit too, so I'm not trying to jump ahead here, Matt, but
no worries.
well, how do we enforce, how do we catch it? How do we know? Well, a big piece of it is, the AI, while, is amazing, it also is very rhythmic. It's very predictable in a lot of ways. You have to really be clever in your prompts to change things around so that you can't really see that there's like a pattern, that there's a likelihood that this was AI generated or a portion of it, right? And so by you putting prompts in and you seeing how the output and kind of like what it creates for you, you start to like understand what the students are capable of, what its limitations are. And then also just with advancements, it's constantly being updated. It's constantly getting better. So you're kind of keeping up to what can it do now as compared to what could it have done 6 months ago, a year ago. So I would say finding that dedicated time to use it, to try different prompts. There's also a lot of guides online too. Like Google has a great one for Gemini, and it's specific for educators. So you can even, could do a search for it. I could always send it to you too, Matt, to send it out. But it's a course, takes you a few hours, and it kind of helps you walk through on how you as an educator can use it, and in the classroom, how students can use it too, which again helps you just kind of understand how it's working. Copilot, which is Microsoft, they do the same thing, and I'm sure there are other ones too out there. I just am familiar with those too. So even just taking the time to go through some of these free online courses and doing it yourself gives you more confidence, gives you an ability to understand, how it's evolving and how it's being used by students.
Excellent. Thank you, Adam. Yeah, nothing like kind of getting yourself your own experience with it, as opposed to just kind of theoretically talking about it. So, Michael, tell us a little bit about how you approached PD with your teachers at Bishop Kenney, and also your thoughts on one question that came into us from the principal at Colby Cathedral in Bridgeport, Connecticut, was, is it a good idea to split up your more experienced tech savvy teachers versus your more beginning teachers when it comes to their experience with technology? Or how did you approach that, Michael?
Well, I think that's a good suggestion. I always recommend identify your more tech savvy teachers and those for this topic that have a good grasp of AI, and have them help develop the training for the other teachers that maybe aren't so experienced. So your first question about what we did here at Bishop Kenney, our AI task force over the last 2 school years has had 2 full professional days just on a technology/AI training. And what we did is we offered a general faculty session where we could discuss the big picture, our philosophy, the things we wanted every teacher to know, our school policies, how we're going to handle things. But then we had our teachers sign up for breakout sessions, kind of like a mini conference. But those breakout sessions were led by their fellow teachers. For example, one teacher session was completely focused on the ethics of AI and setting boundaries. Another teacher demonstrated how AI could be used ethically in the classroom for classroom activities. Another one on how teachers could use AI to reduce their own workload and streamline routine tasks. One session was all about designing assessments with AI. And I found that that really is more powerful when it's colleagues helping other colleagues. So I really recommend that kind of that's the strategy, is to have those smaller sessions where colleagues are helping each other. So you as a school leader, you set the big picture and the guidelines, but really empower your teachers to help with the training.
That's great. Thank you, Michael. Adam, back to you. We've started touching on this already, but really, we gotta, when we start thinking about AI and we start thinking about policy, it's easy to lose sight of, ultimately, we're here for the students and student learning. So how do you go about teaching students appropriate uses of AI on a day-to-day basis? How do you integrate that into the classroom, even if whether you're teaching physics or you're teaching math or you're teaching English, where how do you have those conversations with students and integrate that so that you're providing that appropriate and teaching the do's and don'ts of your expectations as well as the overall school expectations?
Well, first of all, no one wants me teaching physics or math, so I don't do that because I'm the communication guy. But when it comes to what I do, so it does go back to, I think that's why it's good for us to first of all be familiar with the programs, understand how they work. And this is going to get to your question, Matt, because by understanding how they work, then you can find the moments to teach students how you could use it ethically, how it could be a tool for you, as we always try to encourage students, and then when it just crosses the line. And a lot of times, Matt, I find it that it's you look for those organic moments that teach students why they need to have earned the knowledge on their own and how AI can complement it. And sometimes that just happens in the classroom. I think it's good for you to show examples, have that conversation with students, and sometimes it will come up naturally. And I think those are the best times to teach. And I always give this example. I do a lot with like Photoshop when I'm teaching students. We create visuals for communication campaigns. And so the students, I teach them from the beginning how you do something from scratch, right? And you have to learn, and they learn all these tools to be able to create a lot of different, using different techniques to create visuals. Well, Adobe Photoshop has actually integrated now some AI, so you can create visuals within Photoshop. It will you put in a prompt and it creates an image for you. So you can see how it could be very tempting for students to always want to maybe use that on certain projects. But this came up once in a class where I was demonstrating something. We were doing like a space scene, so we were doing a visual of a space scene, and I was showing them how we could use AI for the stars. And so I put the prompt in to do AI to put some stars in our space scene, and it looked kind of like cartoonish, like it didn't look right. So then we redid the prompt. The prompt is like what you're telling the AI to create, right? We redid the prompt, and it was a little bit better. It made it a little bit more realistic, but it was kind of like big. They were now realistic looking stars, so they were kind of clunky. It wasn't proportionate. And we did this like 2 or 3 times until I just realized it was an organic moment. And I said to them all right, let's forget about like the AI right now. How can you do this on your own with just the techniques that you've learned in this class? Like, how could we just create the stars? And they all started coming up with these ideas, and we started creating the stars on our own, and we did it, and it had this nice looking scene. And, and that was just a real moment, because I told them, I said, if you had always just relied on AI and not used it as a tool and just think, well, it's always going to be there for me. Yeah, you would have created this star scene, but you guys all saw how junky it looked from the first version when the AI created it. But because you've earned that knowledge over time through this class, and you had to learn those basic skills, you were able to get exactly what you wanted with that. So AI can be a tool. AI can be helpful. Hey, I hope that sometimes we put in that prompt for the stars and it works, right? But you can't rely on it to create your whole visual. You can't rely on it to do all your thinking for you, because it's not going to always be there for you. And if it's not always going to do it right, and we could always talk about this later, and sometimes it's going to be wrong, and that will create ethical issues too. So having them understand the why is where I'm really going with this, why they need to be earning this knowledge, and then how AI could be a supplement, but by just relying on it could cause them problems in the long run. I think it'd be very helpful for students to like, kind of create that balance, to understand that it is a tool and not just this easy fix that's going to magically produce all these great outcomes for them.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Adam. And Michael, I know at Bishop Kenney that you all do a great job with working with teachers as, your administrative team and coaching and whatnot. In terms of instruction, assessment, how has AI changed the way you coach your teachers on how their instruction looks, how assessment looks, how you approach homework? Has it turned things upside down? How has it changed the way teachers are approaching their instruction?
Sure. I don't know if I'd go with extreme as turn things upside down, but it's definitely a paradigm shift. Because, frankly, if you're going to just stick to direct instruction in class and sending the assignment or the practice or the writing prompt home, then you're just opening the door for students to use AI as a shortcut to their learning. And that's been around for a while. I mean, photo math, for example, has been around for years. So now that AI is so readily available and it's everywhere, if teachers truly want to ensure that students comprehend a skill, whether that be math or chemistry, physics, or grammar, I think the practice really needs to happen in the classroom with the teacher guiding the practice and not just sending it home. So that's really been the change on our campus. For example, in our English department, they've been doing more in-class writing versus teaching content in class and having the writing done at home. Because if it's done at home, you don't have the guidance of the teacher, and it's more tempting to just go to the AI. Now, with that being said, there are some emerging AI tools which may help students with the practice. Imagine an AI tool that coaches a student through the math homework or the reading lesson, but guides the student at his or her own pace and skill level. I was just at a conference where I got to see some AI tools that are replacing textbooks, where the kids are working through the math and getting coached in the math, but at the level that they need to be at. I thought that was really meaningful. So I think as a school, this means that we really need to be having conversations, and that's really what's happening here, about how much content do we really need to cover in our curriculum, and instead ensure that we're preparing kids with the skills they need for the world that they're going to encounter. And the world that they're going to encounter is a world with AI.
No, that's awesome. So thank you so much. I'm going to just read one announcement here before we move into enforcement and other questions. For those of you on the call, if any questions are emerging, please feel free to write them in to the chat. But before we move on to that next section, the next part of our conversation, I just want to remind everyone that we have another ADAC Answers live session coming up in 2 weeks on April 2nd, same time, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific, with Sandra Jeremy and Kate McConnell. We're going to be discussing inclusive education, how to better reach all of our students who might have different learning needs. At ADAC, we empower pre-K through 12 educators to meet the learning needs of all students through customized professional development and coaching services. We listen, we care, we customize, and you can find more information on our LinkedIn page, our Facebook page, or on our website, theadac.com. That's THEADAC.com. The next part we want to talk about is enforcement, but maybe a little bit before we get to enforcement, Adam, AI can be a little polarizing. And so when you approach faculty meetings, or when we get all this AI started for the schools that are just getting started, how do you approach those conversations where you might have two camps on a faculty of the, scared of AI, or really just thinking of the negatives that would come with it, versus those who are ready to rip open the AI book, and then you have those that are somewhere in between. How do you navigate that dynamic on a faculty? Because I would imagine almost every faculty has a level of that dynamic.
Yeah, we talk a lot about this, with my field, communication, and students are going into industries like advertising, public relations, and journalism, where AI, like many other fields, but AI right now is being used in the industry, and our industries in general are wrestling with this too. So to answer your question, when we have these discussions, and we do have them often, it always comes down to the learning outcomes and what is it that we really want our students to achieve, and then seeing, is the AI helping or hurting in that case. And so what I mean by that is, if our learning outcome, if we want students for a strategic communication plan to think critically, to have diverse, a diverse set of ideas in there, to have measurable outcomes, were they able to do that without the AI? Right? Yeah, that's it. We need them to do that without the AI. Okay, well then, how much AI do we need them to get there to use that? Right. So what I guess, let me phrase this better. Is the AI helping get there or not? If the AI, we use it to help with the research, we often help it use AI for like, we will say, in this market, would this message work well, or would this message work well? Right. And the AI can give us, based on, based on whatever our messaging is for a certain kind of market, give us suggestions on how it could be sharpened or not, or the demographic we're using be sharpened or not. Well, we find that still works because the students had to think of what the messaging was to begin with. The AI is giving them feedback, back. So it's still fitting along with, it's a helping, right? They had to do some critical thinking, and they had to do some testing, and now they're deciding how to tailor a message. As opposed to, is the AI hurting if the AI is just, hey, come up with 5 different messaging ideas for me, comes up with these taglines, and then they apply it, and there was no reasoning. Well, it didn't really connect with your objective. It didn't really connect with, it didn't connect with the audience you were trying to reach. Well, then that AI was just hurting the case there. So, when we try to think about it, is learning outcomes, right? What is it that we want them to achieve by the end? And if the AI can help them get there, in which ways we can use it, yes. If the AI, we feel like, is just a shortcut, as we keep hearing that term, then no, then it does become polarizing, and we don't want to be using it. So those are the kind of discussions we have always. It's how the industry is using it. So how much of it, like the industry, how much are we using it in the industry to actually use it as a complementing tool, as opposed to how much of it is it being used right now for a student to try to get a grade and not have really earned that foundational knowledge that they needed to, that will be expected of them once they actually reach the workforce.
Yes, thank you, Adam. Just to respond to Karen in the text, yes, a recording of this will be sent out to everyone who registered for this ADAC answer session. So you'll definitely get a recording of this. Michael, at Bishop Kenney, I'm sure the dean's office was worried about certain things when AI came along, and has even encountered some instances of, gosh, was this academic integrity issue? Was it not? Was it dishonesty? Several of those questions came in our registration. So can you talk about your approach to kind of looking at academic integrity when it comes to AI?
Sure. Ben, you're right. This has been a hot topic for a while now. So when AI is suspected, a misuse, I guess, of AI, or using it to violate academic integrity, we really ask the teachers first to have a conversation with a student. Sometimes in those conversations, the student will admit to using AI, or maybe there was some misunderstanding. And in some cases, it becomes a teachable moment. But if a teacher reports an incident to our deans of being an unethical use of AI, or let's say like a clearly AI written paper, there is a process that we go through. So the dean and the teacher will usually discuss the context. So what instructions were given? Was it crystal clear that students should not use AI? Usually that's the case. And they look at the evidence together. Our dean of students will consult with our academic dean. Sometimes they consult with me as well. If honestly, the evidence usually needs to be pretty clear if we're going to go the full disciplinary route, like what we call here an honor code violation. And we've had some of those. Sometimes the students just admit to it. For example, you can think of just a pretty clear examples, but then we get the ones that are maybe not so clear, or maybe they misunderstood. Oh, I thought we could use AI to come up with ideas, and I maybe overuse those ideas. So it's a case by case basis, I would say.
Excellent. How have you had those conversations with your teachers about kind of differentiating that is it a teachable moment versus is this a disciplinary issue? Does it vary I know that's a nuanced question and it's probably depends, but can you kind of give us an example that might help illustrate that? Because I think that might be helpful for other school leaders.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have this year especially had departments working on what are their AI guidelines in their department. So, for example, if it's a class that's teaching grammar and writing, and you're being assessed on your grammar skills, and you take your sloppy work and you throw it into Grammarly and submit something that's beautiful that doesn't demonstrate your own skill, well, clearly that's an unethical use of AI. But a science classroom or a computer science classroom, Adam's classroom, the AI might be acceptable. So really where it comes down to, does this become a disciplinary, is did the teacher give clear expectations? So we're always reminding our teachers, give clear expectations of what is acceptable and not acceptable. And that usually helps then define that boundary of whether a student crossed a line or not. Sometimes with our younger students, there might be a little bit more grace to say, okay, this is the first time, this is a teachable moment. Let me show you why this was a little unethical. Here's what you should do in the future. And then if it keeps happening, then we might go, a more disciplinary route.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. We are past 4:30, and we're so grateful for everyone sticking with us. This is such an important topic. It's a new topic, still relatively new, and working through it. But Adam, can you give us some final thoughts? If there's one or two things that you would want a school leader to take away from or to have in mind as they're developing or continuing to develop their AI policy, something that you think is really important to hold on to?
Yeah, I think, and we've touched on it in different ways, but I think there really needs to be three pillars here when you're thinking about it. One is coming up with an AI, policy school-wide, at least the guidelines like we were talking about, and then how much within that each faculty member or department has as wiggle room, at least that's defined, but some overall AI policy enforcement, policy baked into that. Number two then is the continuing education part. And that could just be like a lunch and learn type. That could be, like we were saying, having some of the more advanced teachers work with some of the ones that aren't as tech savvy. But in any case, having teachers use at least AI a couple times a year to start to understand how it works, start to familiarize themselves with it. So that kind of that education, and also talking about it with the students in the classroom, but that kind of ongoing educational aspect of not just saying, all right, we did our policy, we're done, right? So keeping it, keeping it in the front and center. And then the third part would be the enforcement. Michael talked about, his approach, I think is great, but that there's clear enforcement because if a student does do it, and a faculty member tries to then enforce it, and there is no policy stopping that student, or the enforcement the faculty member doesn't maybe feel like that there is anybody there helping them with they're going to bring this to light, then it kind of just goes unchecked, and then it maybe is going counter to what we're all saying here about having students not just rely on it, right? And that's actually an issue I think that we're going through in many colleges, that there's very lackadaisical approach to enforcement. So I think by having those three, at least that you kind of have like a clear outline, you have a clear guide on how to kind of keep this constantly evolving, keeping this on top of it by making sure that you're visiting those three. And as we all know, AI is evolving, so this isn't going to go away. This is something that's going to have to be getting touched on over and over again.
Excellent. And Michael, any final thoughts?
Well, I really like Adam's three-pillared approach, and I would agree with that. And I think I would just reiterate the ongoing conversations, but setting clear expectations. So your school expectations might be a little bit more broad. I like in the high school setting, the departments are coming up with clear guidelines, but then for the teacher level, it's every assignment, an ongoing conversation with the kids about what is acceptable and not, the do's and don'ts. And, the other part of this conversation that we haven't really touched on is all the AI tools that teachers can use for their work. So again, it's that whole balancing act of we're talking a lot about what's right and wrong for the students, but also for the professionals too. And how we're going to explore that.
Yep, that absolutely. That could be a whole other conversation about
Yes.
teachers using AI to write emails to parents, to help with grading, to brainstorming lesson planning and activities and things like that. There's and just always remembering that that AI is a tool. It can be a great tool, but we have to use it with prudence and with ethics. And we just really appreciate everybody who joined us today. We know there's so much more we could be talking about on this topic. We are going to send this recording out to everyone who registered. We are also developing a list of guiding questions for as you're writing your policy or reviewing your policy, that will have some guiding questions that'll be that will hopefully help school leaders in thinking through aspects of their policy. And we'll be sure to include ones on what's acceptable teacher use or educator use of AI as well. But again, 2 weeks from now is our next ADAC Answers live session. Thank you to Adam and Michael for graciously leading our discussion today, and for everybody who joined us. Again, learn more about ADAC at www.theadac.com. We're so grateful that you joined us today.